How's it going, everyone? I wanted to do a video today on Michael Millerman's new essay, relatively new essay, The End of the Straussian Moment, which is a response essay to Peter Thiel's classic essay, The Straussian Moment, where Thiel makes the conclusion that the world is more in a Girardian moment, where the peacekeepers are more necessary than ever, and which invites a Christian overtone, some religious overtones, maybe that we all have to be Christians or something like that. And here, I think Michael Millerman, who is a philosophy professor, has his own philosophy school where he teaches Plato, Heidegger, um, Alexander Dugin, among others. Um, Challenges that a little bit and really makes the case for um, maybe the primacy of philosophy. I haven't read this in a bit, but I've kind of wanted to do this video just because I think that's an important idea that we always have to have this philosophical mind, um, that there's always another question to ask, and we might get caught in our boxes of interpretations, which are good. We need those things to make sense of the world, but when those things become dogmatic, we can run into trouble. So, yeah, I think this is a really important essay um, that kind of goes over that. I think that's at least what I remember it talking about. So we'll get into it and see the details. The end of the Straussian moment. This was February 20th, 2024, from the print edition of the European Conservative. A brief reconsideration of Peter Thiel's justly famous essay may help us understand why, in politics, there is only the Straussian moment. It is surely remarkable that the best-known Girardian of our time, namely Peter Thiel, wrote an essay which was meant to point to the superiority of René Girard's analysis of modernity over those of other contenders, and called it the Straussian moment. Why not the Girardian moment? Why does Strauss occupy the titular, and hence in some ways most conspicuous place in Thiel's consideration of the foundations of modern politics? A brief reconsideration of Thiel's justly famous essay, arguably famed for its title more than anything, may help us understand why in politics there is only the Straussian moment, even if it is coupled with prudent hope and faith in a peaceable world, and who could doubt that it should be? The final words of Thiel's essay on the Straussian moment juxtapose two alternatives to the modern, desacralized, unserious, and predominantly commercialized Western world. Quote, the limitless violence of runaway mimesis, or the peace of the kingdom of God, unquote. This can be compared to another juxtaposition, that of The City of Man, the name of a book by Leo Strauss that Thiel cites throughout, and that is used for his final citation. The first apocalyptic alternative is Girardian and Christian. Strauss, by contrast, is classical. Whether we have limitless violence or peace depends partly on whether the Christian statesman or stateswoman wisely sides with peace after weighing the correct mixture of violence and peace. Perhaps a wise Christian statesman or stateswoman can at least restrain the hell of limitless violence, if not inaugurate the messianic era in which peace has replaced division between friends and enemies. Strauss's The City of Man has an entirely different mood and tenor, far from either heaven or hell on earth. Compare the nearest parallel in Strauss's book to the complete chaos of runaway violence. In his chapter on Thucydides, Strauss writes that, in Thucydides' work, we become at once immersed in political life at its most intense, in bloody war, both foreign and civil, in life and death struggles. Thucydides shows us all the brutal particulars of politics, but most of the time the city is at peace, and not immediately exposed to that violent teacher war. And in peace it can practice moderation and obedience to the divine law. The political historian and the political philosopher do not have visionary expectations about what the divine law can accomplish in a political setting. Messianism is not classical. As Strauss writes, the belief in progress must be qualified with a view to the fact that human nature does not change. No change in human nature, no progress beyond politics to the peace of the kingdom of God, not in this life. It may look then that the conflict between Girard and Strauss is simply the conflict between Jerusalem and Athens, a conflict Thiel discusses in his essay in those terms. The Messianic era is at home in Jerusalem, unchanging human nature in Athens. But does this schematization but does that schematization help us make sense of Thiel's conjecture that in the debate between Strauss and Girard, perhaps the key issue of contention can be reduced to a question of time? Yes and no. For Thiel, the question of time concerns the problem of when the highly disturbing knowledge of the violent heart of politics will burst upon general awareness. He has in mind the general concern that politics will end if the mechanisms of violence at its heart are unconcealed. Girard does not share this concern because, for Girard, there will come a day when there is no esoteric knowledge left. There does not come such a day for Strauss, however. The chasm separating the wise from the vulgar is not crossed over time. The conditions that require a philosopher to write esoterically change as little as does human nature. In the conflict between Girard and Strauss, time is thus at issue, not in the sense of when, but rather in the sense of whether, if at all. As Strauss said in his debate with another defender of the political significance of time or history, Alexander Kojève, philosophy, in a strict and classical sense, is a quest for the eternal order, for the eternal cause or causes of all things. It presupposes that there is an eternal and unchangeable order within which history takes place and which is not in any way affected by history. Time is at issue as the repudiation of this presupposition. Properly understood, if there is a Straussian moment, it is the eternal moment within which political history occurs. It can be likened in the following way to Plato's cave allegory. That allegory depicts a permanent structure feature of nature with respect to its education and lack of education, and a permanent structural feature of political life, within which we can identify three, if not four stages. The stage when all we see our shadows, the stage when we are made aware of the fire against whose light the shadows are cast, and the stage when we exit the cave altogether and learn to see by the light of the sun, and finally the return to the cave. There is history as we pass through these stages and ascend and descend, but the stages themselves are structurally fixed. There is not progress in the sense that the bright light of the sun could ever replace the role of the fire and become the sole source of light for those who prefer the shadows. So I think that sentence there says a lot, sums up a lot of the essay so far. Similarly, the structure of politics that Strauss discusses largely through his commentaries on classical political thinkers is not one that changes fundamentally. In his book on Machiavelli, to which Thiel pointedly refers, Strauss writes that Machiavelli, the first modern, does not bring to light a single political phenomenon of any fundamental importance which was not fully known to the classics. The basic political phenomena may be distorted, suppressed, forgotten, or ignored. The emphasis in their presentation may shift here or there depending on circumstances and the intentions of a given author, but they remain essentially the same. History or time is deprived of its revelatory role. Accordingly, there is no notion in Strauss of the role of fate or destiny in politics, although the classical notion of chance remains, so much so that modernity can be characterized partly by the non-classical intention of conquering chance. How, then, can Thiel suggest that, for a Straussian, there could be no fundamental disagreement with Oswald Spengler's call for action at the dramatic finale of the Decline of the West, when that call for action concerns precisely destiny, historic necessity, and the fates? What is decisive for Strauss's account of the City of Man is, above all, the philosophic quest for truth, a quest that is ever spurred on by the awareness, excuse me, spurred on by the awareness or of ignorance or lack, and by an erotic drive to possess the beautiful and needful. In Spengler, he writes in his dramatic finale of life, blood, and the will to power, but not of wisdom and the quest for it, i.e., philosophy. Strauss and Spengler are poles apart, even as Spengler does not recognize Socrates in passing. as the peak of one high culture among others. The Straussian use of Girard would have taken advantage of the Christian dimensions of Girard's thought at time when a prudent and statesmanlike re-Christianization of political discourse was deemed appropriate. Let us not forget that Thiel's essay begins by stating that the attacks of September 11th have called the foundations of the modern West into question. How? The modern Western world is a deliberately secularized Christian world that has been moved away from the existential concern with the deep, serious dimensions of human life, like those addressed by religion, toward commercialism and a doctrine of rights based on circumventing the difficult question of what is man, not to mention the related and all-important question that, as Strauss put in the final line of The City of Man, is coeval with philosophy, although hers does not frequently pronounce it, the question, quid sit Deus? By moving away from the serious dimensions and all important questions, the apostles of modernity may have believed that they were moving away from the deepest sources of conflict, as Thiel explains through his commentary, but Strauss once wrote as follows: agreement at all costs is possible only as agreement at the cost of the meaning of human life. For agreement at all costs is possible only if man has relinquished asking the question of what is right, and if man relinquishes that question, he relinquishes being man. But if he seriously asks the question of what is right, the quarrel will be ignited, the life and death quarrel, the political, the grouping of humanity into friends and enemies, owes its legitimization to the seriousness of the question of what is right. We cannot relinquish our humanity. Modernity is not enough. But neither can we accept Schmitt's agnostic repoliticalization of the West vis-a-vis Islam. Thiel argues, since that risks doing away with everything that fundamentally distinguishes the modern West from Islam, and would therefore be a pyrrhic victory. Western repoliticalization would amount to a kind of mimetic rivalry with the Islamic world, and mimetic rivalry leads to runaway violence. So we need the political, but not in the way Schmitt gave it to us. With Girard, however, we get a political theology, Christian stateswoman or straight stateswoman, that is aware of mimetic rivalry and that aims to side with peace. What would distinguish that Straussian use of Girard from Girardism, pure and simple, would be the recognition, or at least the well-founded suspicion, that the arcane truth of the basic human situation is not about to burst upon general awareness, that the catatonic nature of politics and not the messianic overcoming of the appropriate field of action from the philosophic statesman. Thiel has said elsewhere that only by seeing our world anew, as fresh and strange as it was to the ancients who saw it first, can we both recreate it and preserve it for the future. But how do we see the world as fresh and strange as it was to the ancients when we have inherited so many ways of looking that stand between us and the original phenomena, including the long history that interprets the world for us conceptually? Strauss had an answer. He says that the world as it presents for and experienced by a natural view had been the subject of Plato and Aristotle's analysis. Therefore, if we want to arrive at an adequate understanding of the natural world, we simply have to learn from Plato and Aristotle. That means in part unlearning what we believe we know through hearsay, tradition, and history. It requires a careful return to what they wrote, free and gradually freed from preconceptions. Strauss does not say quite what Thiel suggests, that we must recreate and preserve that world. But he does say that what is decisively important is that we first learn to grasp their intention, and then that their results be discussed, in order that we better understand the quarrel between the ancients and the moderns. Thiel must know that he was bending the truth when he wrote that. Unlike Strauss, the Christian statesman or stateswoman knows that the modern age will not be permanent, and ultimately we give way to something very different. Strauss never argued or implied that the modern age will be permanent. The tendency of all of his writings is precisely to put the classical alternative back on the scales, predominantly through a recovery of Plato and Aristotle, the other two authors besides Thucydides that he discussed in The City of Man. So that is Michael Millerman's essay, The End of the Straussian Moment. I Yeah, like I said in the beginning, I think it's important to um, I think what Millerman is saying in there is that, I mean, I'm very fascinated by Girard. Um, you can get pigeonholed into thinking that's the only way of thinking about the world, um, the messianic age, the apocalypse is coming, and we need to be, I don't know, we all need to be Christian or something like that. Um, this kind of inevitable progression, which is, I think there's a lot of truth in that, but also I think this is important to think about as well, that there are timeless um, there's a timeless nature about um, human beings, and in um, the environments that we inhabit, um, and we should question our preconceptions, or we should study, um, just like Plato and Aristotle did, um, the timeless things of our existence. What is virtue? What is courage? What does it mean to be a citizen? These are all important questions. What did he say here? The Strauss, which was the question of what is right. And yeah, I guess if you're a Girardian, you would maybe lean way more towards and get pigeonholed into this Christian um, solution, which there's uh, a lot of reasoning to go that way, and I definitely have a lot of sympathy and belief in that. Um, but yeah, I think at the same time, there's always another question, like Millerman was saying here. We're always going to be in the cave. We're never gonna have the sun, maybe Christ be the full, being able to shine fullest for us all the time. Um, there's always going to be the shadows. There's always going to be the fire. Someone's going to be casting shadows, and it's always prudent for us to, um, in the moments, question, just like Plato and Aristotle and all the timeless philosophers did um, about the virtues. And yeah, so let me know what you guys think. If you've read this, how you think it compares to Thiel's original essay, what you think the essence of both are, and um, yeah, interested to hear what you think. And I hope you guys have a great Easter and are doing well. Take care.